When you're working in Dynamo or Revit, it's all about data types. You need to know what kind of data you're working with. In Revit, you could think of this like when you try to place a wall or a door in a wall, you need to use a door family in order to place it in a wall. Those data types interact with one another. In Dynamo, it's no different, and there are several different data types to worry about. So in this lesson, we're going to cover all the various data types that you're going to run into in Dynamo. This includes things known as strings, integers, doubles, booleans, and null values. Strings are kind of an interesting one. We'll get into that here in a second. And in addition to these basic data types, there are several data types you need to think about when working with Revit elements. And we'll get into that on the next lesson. With that in mind, let's go ahead and get right into this lesson. In order to get started with this lesson, we're going to go ahead and start a new blank workspace. We are working with various data types, so this is a lesson where you can follow along, and we're just going to place a few nodes to interact with them. The first set of nodes can be found under the Input category in the library and under Basic. These are all of our basic input types that are also basic data types in Dynamo. We're going to go ahead and place a node called String, and if you hover, you can see that it says Create a String. Place that node now. With this node placed, we can add various values to it that represent text. So for now, we'll go ahead and type hello. In this case, if we hover, we can actually start to see the value as well. In this case, we'll add a watch node to preview our value to see what we're getting from this node. I'll go ahead and right click and search for a watch node. We'll place this and we can make a connection to see what our output looks like. In this case, it's hello, and that is a string node. String represents several different kinds of text in Dynamo and when you're interacting with Revit. Examples of string parameters in Revit would be things like mark values, comments, names of elements, and things like that. So that's something to keep in mind. Let's go ahead and copy the string. We're going to hold down Control on our keyboard and we'll do a drag copy. There are several different ways to copy nodes in Dynamo. Control copy is one of my favorite, and it's very similar to how you do it in Revit as well. We'll go ahead and type in Dynamo for this string. And now we have another string node. In the case of strings, this is a data type that we have within Dynamo. If we want to manipulate strings, we can navigate to the string category in our library, the modify subcategory, and these are all interactions that we can do with strings in Dynamo. In this case, we typed Dynamo with an initial capital, so capital D Dynamo. There is a node in our library called toLower. So the description of this node is converts the given string to all lowercase characters. Let's place that now to see what it does. In this case, if we connect it and we hover, we can preview this node's value, and now it's lowercase. We've performed an action on that string object with a node from Dynamo. Really cool. Other interactions aren't as clear that you can do to certain data types. So in the case of strings, we're actually able to add those together as well. So if we were to go to the math category and the operator subcategory, we have a lot of different options in here available to us. One of them is the addition node. If we select that node and place it, we'll move this watch node out of the way, we'll see that we can actually connect strings into this watch node. In this case, I use the output of the toLower node and the output of my string node that says hello. So really quickly, we're starting to see that we're able to use some of these different operations across data types. That's pretty cool. In this case, we can add a space to the end of hello, and now it looks correct. And we'll tie this to our watch node as well. So now we have those results available to us. To further expand upon the string node, right now we're just using text, so it kind of makes sense. Let's go ahead and do a Control-C on our keyboard and Control-V for paste copy. In this case, it currently says Dynamo. Let's go ahead and type in AE101, which would represent a sheet number in Revit. I'll also copy this watch node, and we'll make this connection. And now we'll see that we have AE101 as a value. This is actually a text value. It's not a number, even though it looks like it. So that's one thing to keep in mind with your data types. And as we work with this example, we'll start to see how these interact with one another. So for this portion, let's go ahead and select all of these nodes. We'll press Control G on our keyboard for group, and we'll go ahead and name this group string examples. And for the description, I'll just clear it for now, and the title's fine enough. For our next example, we're going to go ahead and look at some of the number operations that we have. So let's go ahead and collapse the math category. We'll go back to input, basic, and we'll see that we have a few other options available to us. We have an integer slider, a number node, and a number slider. These all do similar but different things. Let's go ahead and place each one of them now. Place integer, number, we'll kind of clean them up as we go. And we'll place number slider. And we'll zoom in and make this clear. So for our integer slider, we'll go ahead and search for a watch node as well. And we'll connect it. As we change these values, we'll see that they remain whole numbers. Integers are whole numbers without decimal places. A double or number in Dynamo has decimal places. So that's one thing to keep in mind. At any point, if you need to verify what kind of data type that you're working with, you're able to use a node called type. Let's go ahead and search for that now in our library. Type kind of looks like an elevation marker. It's an object node that goes ahead and interrogates an object type for you and outputs what it is. Let's go ahead and check this node out and we'll place it now. So for this node, it takes any object as an input. So we'll input our integer. If you hover, we should be able to preview its output. At this point, the internal type of this integer is called an int64. So that's the internal type that Dynamo uses. So we know that that generally is how that one's going to work. Let's go ahead and connect this number node to the object type. We'll go ahead and put a decimal number in here, and we'll see that this changes to a double. So when it has a decimal value, it will cast it to a double. Casting is an operation where we actually change one object type to another. So if we use this number node and change it to the number 1, Dynamo is smart enough to know that that should be an integer. Something to keep in mind. If you know that you want decimal precision, you'll have to type that decimal value and just be very specific with it. For the number slider, let's go ahead and connect that now, and we'll see that that is a double value. Even if it is a whole number of 1, it's coming out as a double. And that's because the number slider node is always trying to represent decimal precision. If we tie this to the watch node, we will start to see that we have that number value. Similar to how we modified the string node with some of those operations, we can do the same thing with numbers. So if we go ahead and navigate to string, we'll see that we have a few options in here that apply to things other than strings. So if we navigate to the generate subcategory, we will see that we have a node in here called string from object. This node's pretty interesting because it will convert pretty much any object to a string representation. I'm going to place this node now, and we'll tie our number slider into it and connect that to our watch output. So remember how I mentioned the decimal precision kind of hangs around when you convert data types. So for a double or number, it will convert it to a string with those decimal values. If we were to connect an integer into this, it does convert it without those decimal values. Very important to keep in mind for operations like renumbering sheets or anything like that, because oftentimes you will start to create sheet numbers with numbers, convert them to strings to set those parameters in Revit, and you don't want those decimal values. It's not a fun thing when you have to remove those after the fact. So something to keep in mind when you're working with data types. In the case of converting a number to a string for use in Revit, you're going to want to use an integer. And the way to make sure that it's an integer is to kind of interrogate the Dynamo graph with this object type node. Really good thing to keep in mind. If there's one thing you get from this lesson, it's that object type node just to interrogate what's going on in your Dynamo graph. In addition to the object type node, generally speaking, nodes will tell you on their input port what they're expecting as an input. So in the case of string to lower, it says string on the input port. That kind of prompts you that you need to put a string object type into that input port. If we were to drag our number slider over here, hook this to the to lower, it's going to end up giving us an error. And oftentimes the errors are very helpful in Dynamo. So string to lower expects argument types of string, but was called with a double. Dynamo's telling us, hey, you gave us a double, we were expecting a string. So always read your errors as well. They're very helpful. I'm going to put our number back over by our number operations. And we'll go ahead and group these nodes. We'll title it numeric operations. And I'll clear the description once again. So that's two clusters of data types that we're working with in Dynamo covered. The next one that we want to cover is a Boolean example. So Booleans are true and false values. You'll interact with these a lot in some of the later lessons when we're making graphs that interact with the Revit model, but it's good to know kind of what they mean. So examples of Booleans in Revit, for instance, are yes, no parameters. So if you have a parameter in there that's a checkbox value, like room bounding for walls, that's a Boolean parameter. One thing to keep in mind. If we navigate to input, basic, we will see that we have a Boolean available to us in here. Let's go ahead and place that node now as well. So for Boolean, we'll go ahead and copy our watch node as well. You'll notice that once I have a node, I'll seldom search for it. The control drag, something that you'll do the whole time. And we'll connect this watch. And now we'll see as we click this toggle, this is a UI node, we have true and false values that are being output for us. Really handy. What's really great with these Boolean nodes is you are able to start using them to toggle things in your Dynamo graph. So let's go ahead and place two additional string nodes. We'll clean these up a little bit. We'll type option A, option B, and those are two values that we can toggle between now. In the case of Dynamo, there are several ways to do conditional statements. So in Revit, a lot of times you interact with these in parameter formulas and families. In Dynamo, you can do a lot of that as well. If we were to search for a node called if, we will see that we have a few options available to us. In the case of what we want to use for this example, it's this first option. In the library, if you ever click on this little underlined set of text, it will actually take you into the library where that node resides. So as you get more comfortable with searching, you can start to find out where the nodes appear in the library. It's really handy to know where they appear because there are a lot of other great nodes in that same category a lot of the time, especially the Revit elements. Let's go ahead and place the if node now. So this if node, if we hover, it tells us that it's returning the result of a true or false input depending on what is toggled in the test input. So let's go ahead and connect our option A to true, our option B to false, and you'll see that the input ports are turning blue because they're fulfilled, and we'll toggle and turn. We'll plug in our watch node's output into the test. We'll hover and pin this preview, and now we'll see as we toggle true and false, we're starting to see option A and B appear. What's really interesting with Boolean values is behind the scenes, they're essentially integers. So they're 0 or 1. To kind of expand upon that further, let's go back to this integer node at the top. We'll copy it, and we're actually going to use this as our input now. So let's see, we'll drag this and kind of make room for it. Sliders are really interesting because you can change their values as well. So what we'll do is we'll actually click this drop down. We can specify a minimum value, so it's 0, and a maximum value of 1. So now this is essentially a Boolean node. So as we slide it, we only have two choices. Let's go ahead and replace this input of our watch node. And now we'll see that we have a Boolean node. In this case, true is 1 and false is 0. So I had that backwards. But we do have it to where 0 is false and 1 is true. So as you slide this, you can now see our if node updating in the background as well. In Revit, whenever you actually query parameters that are checkboxes, if it is true, it is a 1, and if it is false, it is a 0. So you'll see that a lot of time in Dynamo when you're working with those parameter types as well. This is one example of how some of these data types cross over and how they operate within Dynamo. Pretty cool thing to keep in mind. In addition to this boolean, we'll expand upon this further in a list example, but we're able to start filtering things. So it's going to be a big interaction with boolean values that you use within Dynamo, and we'll build that completely out in a later lesson. Essentially, I use them a lot for true and false toggles though. So like in the case of setting parameters in Revit, a lot of times I'll give people a true or false to say, go ahead and update the Revit model or not. Something to keep in mind in the case of updating Revit elements. Let's go ahead and group these nodes now. So we'll select them and press Ctrl G on our keyboard for group. We'll say Boolean examples. I'll clear the description once again. And now we have a few of our data types expanded upon within this example. This is not all of the data types that you'll be interacting with in Dynamo by any means. There are more than we can cover, but this is a nice introduction into the data types that you'll be interacting with to begin with. For example, if we go back to this input category, we'll see that we have other categories in here that we didn't even interact with. We have things like date time. So if you want to know exactly what date it is or something like that, you can do that. I think one of these has a actual date picker in here that you can use. So that's really nice. So you can format dates and everything like that. So if we were to do day of year from a date time, you can start to extract some of that data from these data types. So in the case of seeing what data type this is, I'll copy this object type once again. We'll tie that in and we'll see that that's a new object type that we can interact with. So that's really cool as well. We are able to interact with those date times in that way. So we will expand upon a lot of these data types as we get further into the lessons. So there you have it, a few of the basic data types that we'll interact with in Dynamo. In the next lessons, we'll interact with Revit elements and we'll really expand upon those data types. One big thing from this lesson is I want you to always be thinking of what kind of data types you're working with. More often than not, if you get stuck, looking at what data type you're supposed to be working with versus what you're giving a node really helps you out a lot. So with that in mind, I look forward to seeing you on the next lessons.